here's the book, here's the
Dennis Ashbaugh's drawings. Yeah.
So I think, we saw it happen again in another form. So your work, you've moved on to other things.
Yes.
All right. So do you want to talk about, other projects that came out, things you did differently from this?
Yeah. In 1993, after this literally was shipping when I was at Clarion, which is the science fiction writing workshop, and that experience for me was all about moving some of the things that I had learned about complexity in narrative into something that I could sell.
Yeah.
And so since then, my literary output, so to speak, is all short stories.
Yeah.
But short stories attempting to use some of the things I've learned here. So in the first short story that I had published, Jigoku no Moku Shoroku, what I was doing there is a first-person narration from the point of view of a sentient elevator, and within that are chunks of narration to set a world from the point of view of a non-human character.
Yeah.
In another story, the Goldberg, where I take the Goldberg variations. So the story's called Keyboard Practices, which is the original title of Goldberg's variations. I literally have head quotes in each of the interspersed among the sections, which are objects in a fictional world. I mean, which are pieces of text that are modally appropriate, that are being quoted in this fictional world. So I have since found ways of using the techniques that I developed here, or that I didn't develop, but that I deployed here, in service of other more linear fictions. So I'm not saying I'm never going to write one of these again, but what I am saying is that, I've had my crisis of realism. Mm-hmm. And if I were going to do another one, unless I had a conceit which allowed me to get away with stuff, I hold myself to such a standard that I wouldn't, I couldn't get away with this anyway. You can't get away with the sort of one-bit graphic approach.
Yeah.
It has to be, if you're going to create modally appropriate artifacts now, they have to be modally appropriate.
Yeah, that's why teams, we start to develop these teams. So even in scholarship, we can't do it ourselves. I'm not a video. I mean, the panic I have is like, oh God, I got to videotape this again.
You just can't do it.
It's just I panic because I can do it, but it will not be at the level that Aaron can do it.
Exactly right. I mean, and that's
a good thing.
It's a good thing, but it is, what it means is that you, as a writer, that's a different skill set.
Yeah.
So you need to be a project.
Does that mean writers always constantly struggling to keep up with advances in technology? I mean, when you produced this, you had a level of technology that was, the way you explained it, hard defined. I mean, there was a hard ceiling in what you could do and what you couldn't do. And technology has continued to advance since that time. Now you can do exponentially more, and to a greater degree of accuracy, immersion, realism, resolution, whatever. But is that always necessary? Because at the essence of both, one end of the spectrum or the other, is the story. Mm-hmm. And the story's ability through narrative to engage the reader / participant to realize we're going to move into the spectrum. So does the writer have to keep up? with technology, or can the writer still focus on the narrative?
I think it depends. That's a pretty waffly answer.
It was a waffly question.
Yeah. McLuhan says that every technology takes the previous technology as content. So, in some ways, the evolution of media is like the evolution of the human nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't gotten rid of the medulla. It's still back there, and it's still doing what it always did. It's keeping us breathing, right? It's keeping our digestive system working. We just built stuff on top of it to take over additional functions. So we still have print. We still have linear text, right? We still have. I sell short stories, and that's a thing that writers can still do. You can get a ton of people to read your stuff if you put it up on websites. Just regular written fiction. Fanfic is very popular. People like to write and like to read stuff, and it just has to be text. Does every writer have to do complex multimedia? No. There's probably a question of appetite, and then there's a question of what kinds of stories can you only tell with this medium. Now,
well, that's the more interesting question.
It is, and you think about the writers who seem to be pushing the boundaries of print. Think about people like Borges. You read the Aleph and you say, boy, that's pretty much you're bumping up against, or Library of Babel.
Mm-hmm.
You're talking about the boundary of text itself. And again, I'm reading these as science fiction. I'm not reading these because they're fancy literature. Because I read Borges as science fiction. I don't want people to think that I know more about literature than I really do. Because I'm a genre writer. I write science fiction. What are the stories that you can't tell if you're just writing print fiction?
Yeah.
And the story that I was trying to tell here in the Funhouse about the indeterminacy of identity is something that I would have a hard time, even with my 20 years retrospective look back, I would have a hard time taking something like this and trying to turn it into a linear text. That's, you look at, Rob Swigert was able to take Portal and turn it into a novel. Because that's a mystery. It's essentially, fundamentally, it's a mystery story, right? We understand how to traverse a mystery story and figure out an answer. When the answer is something like maybe, that's a lot more difficult, I think.
Well, so then another through line from your work might be to Pulp Fiction, which exploded the notion that there has to be a definitive beginning, middle, and end, which is something we always tell students there should be in every good piece of writing, no matter what it is, from an essay for your class to an email message to even a tweet.
Yep.
There's a beginning, there's a middle, and an end. And it generally goes in that order, the beginning first, then the middle, and then the end. But arguably your work showed that it doesn't necessarily have to happen that way, that you can have, as you say, a mosaic of different pieces that can be put together to create something without necessarily having to follow the links that the hypertextual author has built into whatever for you to work with.
And then the completion happens in here, in your head, when you look at it in a particular way, in a particular sequence, and something happens in your head, and you make meaning. And we're used to, as you say, we're used to prescriptive meaning making.